Welcome everybody to our summer Sizzlers session tonight. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started with our next summer Sizzlers session tonight. We're very excited to have Marcel Quimby here, and Irene will do the introduction in a minute. But before we get started, again, I'm David Preziosi with Preservation Dallas, and we want to thank McCoy Collaborative, who is our sponsor for the series this year. We greatly thank them for being our series sponsor. So now I want to turn it over to Irene, and she will take over from here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Irene Allender, and I am the Membership and Programming Coordinator for Preservation Dallas. Tonight, we have a great presentation on historic jails. Don't forget to sign up if you haven't already for our future sessions. We have 3 more sessions left. Next week on Tuesday will be the legacy of roadside parks. September 7th will be about the Farnsworth House, and September 14th will be about the rock wall. So today we have Marcel Quimby. She's an architect and leads Quimby Preservation Studio, a small firm specializing in historic preservation projects and preservation planning. Recent historic projects include the restoration of the Hall of State at Fair Park, and she is currently consulting on the Reverchon Park Grandstand, a baseball grandstand which dates from 1924. Many of her projects have been recognized with local and state preservation awards. Marcel has been active in the preservation community in Dallas for over 30 years, serving as past president of Preservation Dallas, the Dallas chapter of the American Institute of Architects, and served on the board of advisors for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and lives in the Hollywood Santa Monica Conservation District near White Rock Lake. If anybody has any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll save those until the end and ask Marcel any questions. So Marcel, it's all you now.
Great. Well, welcome to Historic Jails in Dallas. And this is about 3 jails dating from the early 1900s. They were considered modern in their day. And prior to the early 1900s, jails were pretty rough. Many of them were small jails, no windows, lots of jail bars, insecure. People would escape. People would sneak in pies and files and, assist with that. No ventilation. That would have been fun in the summer. And everybody was just put in there, men were just put in together, no separation for juveniles. And then in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, people started looking at jails differently and decided, and they evolved to be more secure. provide common day room spaces with daylight. Some of them even had exercise yards. Separation of juveniles from adults. Women were provided with better facilities. And there's 3 jails we're going to talk about today, and they're all still existing. And the buildings are existing in Dallas. Obviously, they're no longer jails. One is the City of Dallas Jail that was active from 1908 to 1914 in the West End, and then the Dallas Jail, the Municipal Building, and Dallas County Jail in the Criminal Courts Building. So because we've got 2 city jails, Dallas City Jails, I'm going to give you just some overview about the government and the jails, from the mid 1950s. And the first city hall was built in 72. It was a 2-story building. It's shown in the lower photograph. There were actually retail spaces below, and the city hall was upstairs with all the windows. And there has been they had a jail, and it was separate at that time. And I've not found a photograph of that. They built a new city hall, which is the upper photograph, in 1889, and that had a jail in the basement. And towards the end of its tenure, there were newspaper reports about how horrible that jail was. Conditions were just awful. There was no light for the prisoners. They were just kind of, medieval, thrown into the basement sort of deal. And so a new jail was built in the West End. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but then shortly after that, about the same time, the City of Dallas sold the property to the Adolphus Busch for his new hotel, and then Dallas moved to the municipal building. So, go back to 1908, and this is a rendering from the Dallas Morning News of the new jail, and this is what it looks like today. It's red brick. It's, obviously there have been some modifications, but it's still there, and it's really kind of a handsome building. And right now, I think it's vacant. For a long time, it was a restaurant and then offices, and I'm not sure what's in it now. But they had this new building was built for $20,000. It had an architect. H.A. Overbeck was the architect. And this photograph is, in the lower photograph is from the jail staff from the annual report in 1910. And they had 4 full-time folks. The guy on the left was the jailer. The matron was responsible for the women. And then they had 2 jailers that I think worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, with probably backup from the other 2 staff. It was a pretty lean operation. And again, it shows up in the back of a photograph of all the mounted police in front of it. So, but this was pretty novel at the time because it did have, a major, the jailer's residential quarters lived there, which was typical. The matron had, she had residential quarters also, and they had judge's office and jury rooms and a courtroom on the lower level. So they did not have to take people out of the jail to attend these services, which was much more secure because that was fraught with opportunities for escape. And the building was only open for 6 years until 1914, until the new municipal building was built, and it moved into that. So here's the here's buildings, the second jail. This is the Dallas Municipal Building, historic photograph. So it was opened in 1914, and the upper floor, if you guys can see, I'm going to see if you can see my arrow. I'm not sure if you can or not, but what looks like a mansard roof at the top of the building is a mansard roof, but there's actually some openings, some window openings in there. And that is the 5th floor, and that's where the jail was. It didn't occupy the entire floor when it opened as a jail in 1914, but it soon grew. And the building was new in Beaux-Arts modern building, one of the few larger Beaux-Arts style in Texas for institutions. And it was quite significant, the building was. It had a basement with medical, lobby with ornate stairs, city council chambers, which are still intact, audiences and the balcony. And Mike Hazel and I have worked really hard to find a photograph of the auditorium, and we have been unsuccessful. So, but it was a pretty remarkable building. And in 1956, they did an addition to it, which was kind of looked like 1950s, to the east side. And that accommodated municipal courts and related offices. And then once the courts had been moved, they went back in and did a renovation of the municipal building, and unfortunately tore out much of the original interior. There were some fabulous spaces, and we've got the photographs that are no longer here. Here was a photograph of the lobby, and you can see the original marble staircase that went up several floors. The columns and marble lined walls with courthouses on the first floor. It was pretty remarkable. This was the city council chambers, and actually remnants of that room, including the paneling and the ceiling, are still intact. And are now being used by the UNT Law Court for moot court, which is really sort of fun. And then one of the most significant things that happened in the building is in 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was apprehended in Texas at the Texas Theater the afternoon of the assassination. And he was on suspicion of murder for Officer Tippett in Oak Cliff. He was brought to the jail in Dallas and detained in the following spaces. He, was processed in jail intake at the basement, spent some time at the 3rd floor, the 5th floor, and we'll talk about each one of those floors. So he was in this building for 48 hours after the assassination, and it was definitely a tumultuous time. This is the 3rd floor. The police department's homicide and robbery bureau was located on the 3rd floor. And you can see one of the long corridors that led in the photograph that led from the homicide offices to the lobby and the elevators. And this is what it looked like when Lee Harvey Oswald was there. They did not separate the press. And every time he was escorted down the corridor to either go to the elevator to go for processing or go up to the 5th floor where he stayed for 2 nights, he was, it was running the gauntlet through the press. It was quite the remarkable scene. This was one of the, in 1963, this was one of the early international events in which people could come and you could, they could share, and they had a new a medium of TV. So everybody in the country and elsewhere across the world were watching this live, or, just minutes after things occurred. And it all was taking place in this corridor on a regular basis. There's another scene of the melee down the corridor as the journalists were piling in. The police were stationed outside the small homicide and robbery bureau, and he was kept in Captain Fritz's office and interrogated. And this is a photograph of that office, which still remains in place. And another shot of him coming up, and Harvey being led through the people, through the battery of people in the public corridor. He was retained on the 5th floor. This photo shows, if you look at the yellow spaces up at the upper left, there's a room, which is a day room, and there's 3 little cells off that. And that's, you're looking at those 3 cells in that day room in the photograph. And he was kept in the middle cell. There was actually, this is where they would keep special people that they wanted to separate. There was actually one guy in one of those cells, and they kicked him out and put him down in general jail area with everybody else. And that's where Lee Harvey Oswald was kept. And there was a deputy sitting on the chair of the day room. So he was, essentially monitored, 24/7 for the 2 days he was there. And this is the, a blow up of the cell that he was placed in. And there's also the top of that original stair that's still intact. It's narrower, but the grand stair, the marble stair, continues to the 5th floor. And then on the morning of November 24th, which was a Sunday morning, after he had been interrogated for 2 days by the city of Dallas, and they really weren't able to get anything out of him, they made arrangements to take him by a vehicle from the Dallas jail to the county jail, where he would then be held until trial. This is a photograph, and those doors are the doors in which, well, the original doors are gone, but those doors are near where the original doors were. And he would come out of there through a short corridor and into this, the parking garage, and you can see the ramp on the right-hand side of the page of the photograph where he would be escorted, he would be taken by the county, by the city police to the Dallas County. And of course, that never happened. The media got hold, were aware of what was going on. Many of them had been staked out, around the building, and they were able to, when things got on, when things happened, they showed up, and we all know what happened. Of interest, there were two photographers that were covering this. One was Jack Beers, which was the Dallas Morning News, and his photograph is on the left, and it's a great shot of Jack Ruby emerging from the crowd with his gun in hand, and Lee Harvey is, the man in the, looks like he's got on a coat, a dark coat, and he's being held by the police, by the policeman, and that's right before the shot happened. And the Dallas Morning News, they were ecstatic with this because they thought, wow, this is a great photograph, and this is a Pulitzer Prize candidate, and they thought they had a really good chance of that. However, Robert Jackson with the Dallas Times-Herald took a photograph, and they estimated it was about a 16th of a second afterwards. And he's been interviewed, and he just said he just saw something, he just saw light, and he took the photograph. And that's actually, so right after the bullet has hit Lee Harvey Oswald. And then the second photograph was the one that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1964. So that was two good candidates and two fabulous shots. And again, that was, shared across the world, all, from this building. So in 1914, the building was built in 1914. In the 1970s, the windows were replaced with new that didn't match the original. And Conley Associates were the architects for the exterior restoration of this, that cleaned the stone, replaced, removed the existing non-historic windows and replaced it with windows that matched the appearance of the historic, and responsible for the look you see today. These are some, and the interior has been restored, which is really remarkable. These are some photographs that really illustrate the recreation of that marvelous ornamental marble stair at the first floor, and then the second floor council chambers have also been restored. And we talked about that earlier. So it's a remarkable building today. And here's the interrogation room where Lee Harvey Oswald was held, and interrogated for 2 days. And then here's the existing jail cell. They kind of kept that in its original condition, which I think it just looks really remarkable. And then this is the current view of that grand stair at the 5th floor that we saw earlier. And then the third building in Dallas County, the third jail, is the Dallas County Criminal Courts building. And this is a really unique building. Prior to this, Dallas County had a series of jails that were actually built on the courthouse square of Old Red. So they were not large. One was 2 stories, I think, with jails upstairs, and all of them were escape proof. There were many instances where, somebody escaped from the building, and there were also instances in which the building could not be secure, and mobs would go in and collect somebody that they were offended by their behavior, and which did also not end well. So they were wanted to build a new secure jail, for this growing city. And one of the things that was similar to the 1908 jail that the city of Dallas built, but on a much larger scale, is this was the criminal courts building. So you had offices and courtrooms in the base of the building, you know, which you can clearly see. And then there were 2 wings for the jail cells for the upper floors. So again, they tried to keep, you know, the inmates within the building to go to court, you know, for services, to be interviewed. And the Dallas County Sheriff's was also in the base of the building. So this included not only the jails, but the courts and the related activities. H.A. Overbeck was the architect for this. And it was at the, you know, this sits right across from Dealey Plaza. It was surrounded by 2- and 3-story buildings. And it was quite a very large, big building that made a statement, you know, for Dallas County at its location when it was constructed. And here's a couple of, it's got a really interesting history. And there have been a couple of incidences, unfortunate incidences within the building. In 1923, Deputy Willis Glover Champion tried successfully actually to defeat an attempted jailbreak, but unfortunately he was shot and killed in his attempt. And so that was, you know, the first event of its kind in the new jail. That was unfortunate. 10 years later, Harvey Bailey successfully escaped from jail. He was captured, you know, within the day, but that was the first jailbreak and one of very few. In 1948, the matron, who was responsible for not only the female inmates, but there was a hospital prison, a jail hospital on one of the floors, and she, you know, staffed that and, you know, assisted the doctors, and was also responsible for the women and the juvenile inmates. And she was killed by a female inmate within the jail, and was the first woman officer killed in the line of duty in Texas. So that was a real blow for, you know, law enforcement. And then in 1959, the annex to the Dallas County Records Building. This building, let me back up. The Dallas Criminal Courts Building sat on a quarter lot of a full block, and Dallas County would ultimately purchase the entire block. The Records Building, which was where you know, typical offices and records were kept, and where you went to get your driver's license and your birth certificate and all that other stuff, took up half of the block at the eastern half of the site. And there was a gas station for a long time on the remaining corner, which actually was catty corner to the school book depository. And in 1955, the county bought that property and did an addition to the building. They called it to annex. And the lower half of it was offices. And then they had 4 floors of jail at the top of the building. So they had an expansion to the jail as part of that building. And so that completed the block, and it completed, you know, the construction, the end of construction for the jail. And you can see in this photograph, you've got the Dallas County Records Building on the right, and you've got the annex, the modern annex from the 50s on the left. Now the saga of, you know, the assassination of President Kennedy continued in 1990 and continued in 1963 with Jack Ruby being arrested for the death of Lee Harvey Oswald. So instead of Lee Harvey Oswald being escorted and maintained at the Dallas Criminal Courts Building, the city police charged Jack Ruby with Lee Harvey Oswald's death, and he was immediately detained, taken to the Dallas County Jail pending his trial. The Dallas police were taking no chances of, you know, another debacle and loss of a prisoner under their watch. And he remained in the building, remained in the jail until his trial in March of 1964. And that was held in the Eastern Courtroom on the 2nd floor in the Criminal Courts Building. He was found guilty. He was actually, his conviction was successfully appealed and overturned, and he was a free man, I think in late 1964, and he was released from jail and free to go, but he was concerned about his concern for his life. He was thinking, he thought that, if he got out and, went back out in public, his safety was compromised. And so he requested to remain in the Dallas County Jail for safety while he was pending a new trial. The trial was scheduled to happen in 1967. However, in late January, Jack Ruby complained of being sick. He was taken to Parkland Hospital. They operated on him and determined that he had inoperable stomach cancer or cancer of some sort. And they essentially closed him back up, and he died a couple of days later. So he died a free man, at Parkland Hospital in Dallas. So that's the end of that saga. But, just like 1963, there was a lot of press in 64 during the trial. There was lines of people outside trying to get seats, lining up. You can see them lining up outside, inside, trying to get inside to watch the trial. That was a big hit. Here are some photographs of the courtroom. The jurors sat over on the right. It was a mixed jury. They had both men and women. We'll talk about them more in a minute. But the courtroom was pretty cool. You can see on the left photograph how interesting that was, even in the black and white photograph. So there's a long history here associated with the jail. When the Dallas County Government Building, which is now George Allen, was opened, its upper floor was also accommodated a jail, and they actually closed the jail in the criminal courts building. However, within 10 years, the new jail was overcrowded, and they reopened the criminal courts building for periods of time, and then finally closed it, I think, in 1983. And also that year, the King courtroom was restored to its original appearance. The courtroom in which the Jack Ruby trial was held had suffered damage from flooding, and it was not in great shape. And the criminal courts building was closed in 2016, pending the current records building complex, which is due to open in this fall, in a phased opening. And of interest is that, these buildings is the Dallas County Criminal Courts Building is located in Dealey Plaza National Historic District. It's also located in the West End National Register Historic District. It's a recorded Texas historic landmark, and it's within the City of Dallas West End Historic District. So, and the other buildings as well, each have, numerous historic designations to each of them. So let's look more carefully at some of the spaces in this building, which is really fascinating. This was the lobby, the original lobby, with tile floor and, again, white marble staircase. They dropped the ceiling when they installed the mechanical equipment, which unfortunately, kind of destroyed the appearance of that room. But you've also, the upper left photographs gives you a view of the really decorative plaster ceiling, which was just gorgeous. And these walls, everything you see, the walls that are painted white in the lower photograph were white marble. And at some stage of the game, somebody decided that they needed to be painted white. Go figure. This is the King courtroom that was restored, including the original woodwork had been painted, and that was scraped and, brought back to its original appearance. So it was, so there were two courtrooms on the second floor, and they both would have looked like this. So that's really cool. You can see the two, there's a hallway down the middle and a courtroom on each side. the building, so we've talked about went on the first floor and the second floor, and you can see how the jail was organized above, the courtroom floor at the base, at the podium of the building. And that entire space that was the jail was a column-free, very tall void. And this is why, well, okay, and we'll get to explain a little bit more about this in a minute. So these are some features of that space. The upper floor shows this stained glass ceilings and skylights that were lit naturally within that open space between the two wings. Those are in the process of being restored and will be back in place when the buildings open later on this year. It was really the colors were really interesting. On the photograph on the left, you can see some bright green and bright blue and some ochres. And again, you had a lot of white marble and the same porcelain tile as you had at the first floor. So here's how the jail was built. So as we said, the second and the first and second floor were accommodated offices and courtrooms, and then there was a floor, and then they built the steel structure within that, and they just went up and up and up. And you can tell how you've got the day rooms and the jail cells there, and then you've got a perimeter corridor on the upper level with brass railings around it, in which the guards could observe what was going on in the jail cells and the day rooms. And it just filled that entire, very tall space with, I think, 5 different levels of jail cells, which was really very interesting. And the construction photograph at the left really gives you an idea of how this thing came to get, like Tinker Toys that just kind of, went up from, above the 3rd floor all the way up to the top of the building, which was really interesting at the time. And you can see again how this is the day room with jail cells on one side, and this is looking outside from the corridor. Again, looking, up, and the jail cells were held away from the windows, so there was no way anybody could, get to the windows and escape. So you had that separation, which was really acted like a light well between, the exterior wall and the jail cells. Here's what some of the jail cells look like. And they had some other interesting spaces. On the 4th floor, there was a chapel. And on the lower right-hand photograph, you're actually back in the secure area where the clergy would be. And you can see that you've got bars between you and the parishioners who are, inmates. And then you had a kneeling rail and a brass rail around there where they could, for Catholic masses, they could take communion. And then the upper photograph shows where the, that clergy area, and that railing that separated, the secure clergy from, they would have had pews in this room. And we've talked to people that have talked to people, and they talk about how the women in particularly appreciated and would attend church services on a regular basis. And elsewhere on that floor, we found this piano, and it was, we were totally confused why there would be a nice piano, in a jail. And then we realized that it was probably there for the chapel. So that was interesting. And obviously that's been taken out and will hopefully show up someplace in the records building once the restoration is complete. This is the Sally Port. This was kind of, and it called it the picket. And this is the entrance to the jail. So if you were being detained, you were, processed down below and brought up to the picket, where you were assigned a cell and, a floor, and all of the keys were kept in this room, and this was the secure room. So it's really very interesting. there was a baptistry that was not original to the building on the mezzanine above it. And there was a storage room that was converted to a baptistry. There's a wooden platform with a bathtub for baptisms, and inmates were, able to get paint and materials from their family, and they painted the scenes. We had a conservator come up and take a look at the paintings, and they were all with acrylic paint, which became popular in the 1970s. So they're pretty cool. But they were not, they were not historic. And unfortunately, they were painted on concrete walls. So it was infeasible to take out these concrete slabs to retain these. So we've got these photographs as a record of what those the room looked like, and the inmates' artwork. This was at the east end of the building. At the upper floor, there was a really large jail. There was a really large space on the 7th and 8th floors. And this particular jail, and you can see marks down the floor, this had been turned into cubicles for jurors. And during the Jack Ruby trial, the jurors for it were sequestered, and they were accommodated for the duration of the trial, which only lasted 10 days. But they had cubicles, and I think the men on one floor and the women on another, and bathrooms. And, once they showed up for jury duty, they did not go home for 10 days. And then they were stayed in cubicles here. They were taken in groups down the street to restaurants to eat. There were some actual pictures taken in a group of them, being escorted by the sheriff's department, when they were out for dinner one night during the trial. So that was really interesting. On the other side, the large open space has been a number of things. And it most currently was a gym, because it's pretty tall. The death row cells there were 3 death row cells for inmates who had been convicted, of capital punishment and would be executed in the space behind the scoreboard, or the backboard for the basketball. And we've got pictures of those in a minute. But this space accommodated this was a wooden frame death row gallows that was installed in this space, and where the 2 gentlemen are is a mezzanine level, and it's there was a door that went into the jail cells, the 3 jail cells that were reserved for people that would be executed. There were only 5 people executed from the time the building opened until 1920. And in 1923, Texas's legislature mandated that all future executions be held in Huntsville. So this was no longer used. This gallows was removed, and the death cell was no longer used for anything. But it's an interesting space. And that's what it looks like. So this is out. The first photograph was taken from the day room, and there's 3 jail cells there. I guess they thought that there might be 3 people at a time that needed those. And this was at the corner of the building, and actually overlooked Dealey Plaza and the school book depository. So it had a great view if you had been lucky enough to actually not be in death row and take a look at it. So this was really an interesting space. And this is a before and after from the Dallas County Criminal Court of Dallas County's website. If you Google Records Building Complex Project, you'll see they've got a great presentation that shows from several views that shows the the historic building, and then what it's going to look like now. And you can see the addition and how they filled in an alley, and then a small addition on the top of the building above the criminal courts building. And there's a second view is from the plaza looking west. And again, you can see that addition at the top, and then the other corner, the west corner, the west facade of the criminal courts building. So we have raced through 3 historic jails in Dallas. And this is the last presentation, and I'll be glad if there's comments or questions, I'll be glad to take any. And here's the records building, a before and after shot. And that's it. David, Irene, are there any questions that we can respond to?
Does anybody have any questions? We have a very quiet group today. All right. Somebody had said she wanted to see exact addresses of each location.
Ooh,
That's pretty.
Irene, I'm going to have to email you that. It is, I can tell you, they, on the west end, I can email you the address. I don't remember what street. Oh, I think it's on Ross Street. Actually, it's on Ross Avenue in the west end. The Dallas Municipal Building is on Harwood Street between Main and Commerce Streets. And in fact, right across the street is Main Street Gardens. So if you stand in the middle of Main Street Gardens and look east, you'll see the image in the center photograph. And then the Criminal Courts Building is on Record Street, which is actually no longer a street. And then Elm on the north side and Main on the south side. And it's right across from Dealey Plaza. But I can send addresses of each one to Irene. I'll be glad to do that.
Okay, so I've got a few questions.
Great.
Somebody wanted to say, so it's fascinating stuff. Other than Oswald's personal cell, are there any surviving artifacts from the 1914 Dallas Municipal Building?
Well, the municipal building is, the exterior is intact. The interior, there's not much left. They really, in 1957, they really did, a wholesale removal of many of the interiors. So I think we showed pictures of the, we showed pictures of the city council chambers. That's intact, but the corridors were removed. I mean, they each had for an example, every one of the floors had wide, probably 8 foot to 10 foot wide corridors that went from the north to south. And then by 1963, you saw Oswald being, escorted down corridors that were 6 foot wide and just plain sheetrock walls. And they had literally torn out those marble clad walls and they were gone. And the same for the elevators. And there were actually murals that were in the building that were largely removed. So it was quite unfortunate. The price of progress.
All right, and I have one more question.
Okay.
When will the records building reopen?
It is going to have a phased, my understanding is it's going to have a phased opening this fall. I don't think my understanding is that the Dallas County Court may not be held there for probably until next year. But its areas of it are really looking pretty good. I had an opportunity to visit last week, and some of the areas are not, are further behind, and probably will open in 2020. But there will be, I think, some spaces and county people, county departments going to work there within a couple months. It's pretty exciting. The interesting thing about this, the project, the Dallas County Records Project, is that Dallas County looked at a number of options. They looked at selling the building. They looked at tearing the building down and building a new building. They looked at moving to areas outside downtown Dallas. And the fact that they decided to stay and do something with these 3 buildings that were in various layers and conditions of neglect. And the most important thing is each one of these buildings had been built as a standalone building and the floors didn't line up. So it was, if Dallas County had walked away from this building, I don't know that anybody would have ever figured out how to use it or had the wherewithal or the interest to, provide, to occupy a building that big, that needed so much work. So while we've lost some, historic fabric in the process, kudos for Dallas County for remaining at their historic location in downtown Dallas.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Marcel. We really
Well,
appreciate
thank you.
it.
This was fun. I hope
Yes.
everybody gets to go see all these buildings.
Exactly. Definitely so. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming and listening to Marcel talk about historic jails. Next week, we will have the legacy of roadside parks, a history of the TxDOT system and all those wonderful parks that those little way stations along the way and all of Texas. We will see you then, and I hope you have a good week.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for attending.
Uh-huh.